Remember when flying cars were all the rage and all the promises about revolutionising transport in our cities? Well, like so many so-called new things that are proposed today, it was just a repeat of earlier ideas from many decades ago that never came to fruition, usually for very good reasons. In today's video, we're going to talk about Aerobuses, otherwise known as helicopters. Let's travel back to the early 1950s in Melbourne. This was when one of the most important urban planning documents in Victoria's history was developed, the 1954 Melbourne Metropolitan Planning Scheme. This was a series of reports, maps and plans for the future of Melbourne that we've briefly talked about before. This scheme formed the basis for many of the things that we still use today, including our planning system, roads and energy infrastructure. As part of this, there was a lot of technical analysis and study, including on transport and how the city would function. The rapid technological changes over the previous 10 to 20 years had opened up a vast array of new opportunities, including the dawn of the nuclear age and huge leaps in aviation. One of these was the advent of helicopters, with the first practical ones beginning to operate through the 1930s and 40s, mostly for militaries around the world. There is a lot of helicopter history here that I won't go through, but it's enough to say here that by the 1950s, the technology was mature enough to start being considered for wider production and use. The 1954 planning scheme and its reports were awash with the promises of this new era, where the future was bright and technology would bring about amazing transformations of how we lived, worked and played, allowing things that were previously unthinkable to become commonplace. And helicopters were part of this dream. The scheme promised that by the year 2003, there would be scores of helipads right across the urban areas for use as a new mode of mass public transport, the Aerobus. Given how new this idea was, the scheme's authors proposed a pilot project, if you will, to test out this idea. This was to build an Aerobus terminal / helipad on top of what was then Spencer Street Station, today called Southern Cross. The report said that the helipad's primary purpose would be to move people from the city centre to an upgraded airport at Moorabbin, which was proposed to become Melbourne's main airport, as well as to the existing Essendon airport as a form of, quote, rapid transit. They claimed that this would be much quicker and easier for aeroplane passengers to travel to these airports, which obviously could not be built in inner city areas. But where on earth did this idea even come from? From what I can tell, it was a mix of wishful thinking, some creative accounting, and clever advertising. We find our first clue in this 1953 article from the Sydney Morning Herald. It promised that British Airlines would soon be offering larger 40 to 60 seat helicopters, quote, within the next 8 to 9 years. The whole point of this was to overcome the commercial feasibility problems of using helicopters for mass public transport and provide a higher capacity vehicle that would apparently present a more economically sound operation. The CEO of British European Airways even toured Australia and New Zealand later in the same year, spruiking these plans for large helicopters that, in his opinion, would be useful to link smaller centres to capital cities. But not even he thought that using helicopters to get people from city centres to nearby airports was a viable plan. This January 1954 article from the Scone Advocate in New South Wales also relates a somewhat exaggerated tale of how Britain was apparently in the process of designing and building the Waterloo Air Terminal. Although the terminal was built and operated from 1953 to 1957, it mainly catered for buses going to the airport instead. There was a limited helicopter service, but it wasn't very successful. So when this building was replaced by the West London Air Terminal in October 1957, helicopter operations ceased entirely. But this didn't stop the breathless commentary on this and other apparently serious proposals around the world, mainly from Britain, as this was still where much of Australia's news was coming from. The media lapped up the hype, and it didn't take very long for it to bleed into government policy and politics. Pretty soon, though, people began to see through the hype, and none of this ever happened. Like many forms of so-called new transport technologies, helicopters have limited use cases. They are very unsuitable for mass public transport because they are low capacity, expensive to run, uncomfortable to use, and most importantly, do not scale. Britain did actually go much further than Australia, trying to develop helicopters as a mode of urban public transport. Perhaps the best known was the original plans of British European Airways that we talked about earlier, which did start widespread helicopter passenger services throughout the British Isles in the 1950s. This eventually became a separate subsidiary company, BEA Helicopters Limited, and later British Airways Helicopters. Today, after being sold off in 1986, it is British International Helicopters, but no longer operates regular passenger flights. The closest that it came to providing a form of urban public transport was the Airlink shuttle service between Gatwick and Heathrow airports in London. As I said, there are very good reasons why this idea never took off, and that's why we don't have a helipad on top of Southern Cross Station today in Melbourne. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more, please subscribe to the channel so that you can stay up to date on future videos. Also, please consider signing up to my supporters portal over at members.philipmallis.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.